Goody, goody, goody. Here we go. All right, good. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome along to another Bharcs special, part of the Bharcs season. Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Bharcs ladies. That's the title that has been adopted. And I have been appointed a honorary Bharcs lady for the duration of this season, so that's great. Oh, good. People coming in. Say hi, everybody. So, do you know, it's great to see you again. And what a wonderful opening weekend we had. We were talking off air, really, about the feedback we had to those conversations. And there's a real theme there, I think, about the authenticity and the vulnerability in the room and the sharing of stories and the recognition that we're all on a journey. It's a cliche, I know, but it's very true, though. And you know, we're all different today based on the events of yesterday, and that's the same for our dogs too, really, and our relationships with each other. I think it's all a really beautiful thing. So hi Marina, hi Kim, hi Susie Ann. Good. So today in the spotlight, Sowjanya,
Thank you.
give us a little flavor about what we can expect today.
So I will be sharing the story of Weasley and Potter. It was a case that I worked on where they were having severe conflict, severe fights. We'll see the videos and we will see their journey. But through the case, we address how we did this through the Bharcs way, but also address a few things that we hear about Bharcs ways, we hear about how our methods work or don't work, and just address a few things along the way.
Excellent. And the format today will be, you've very kindly got some presentational things for us and some slides and some videos. And then we'll be coming in and out of those, and we'll be talking about it as a little panel as well.
Yep.
Good. So I think we'll just get started then. Let's dive straight in. Oh, hi everybody. Hi Bea, hi Gwen, hi Hannah. Great to see you all. Hi Winky. Great to see you. Good. We've got lots of people. And Baron, hello. Hello. So we've got people in, which is always nice. Okay, we'll turn our cameras off and get started with the presentation then.
Yep, thank you. And I will keep bringing you all on.
Let's see you in a mo.
Okay, so I did put up a presentation. And please let me know if you're able to see it. Okay. I hope, can one of you just give me a thumbs up?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. So we'll be talking about Potter and Weasley. Just a little bit of. So the white one is Potter. The brown and white is Weasley. Weasley came into the house first. And then Potter, both of them were adopted. I think they were streeties who were adopted as puppies. And they were just a few months apart, right? So I think let's just dive into the fighting phase and we will see some videos. Just a heads up to everybody who have dogs around, maybe you would want to reduce the volume because there's a lot of like growling and barking in the videos and I don't want to rile up your dogs through the videos. Okay, so the first video is this one, the first one that I'm playing. Let's watch it. We'll talk about each of the videos once I'm done playing them.
I'm not going.
So this is quite a long video.
Good.
Okay. So this is basically one of their interactions. We'll look at the other one. There's a lot of growling in this one, so you might want to reduce the volume. Observe Potter and Weasley. And the third video. So the human walks away in the video.
Weasley, ఇటు వస్తామా లేచిన
And the other one also starts walking away. Okay, I thought let's stop sharing now. And so I'll just give a little bit of context here. So they were around the adolescent phase here. I think it was a few months into Potter coming home. And they were already doing all the things that we speak of, which is, laying the foundation in decompressing, reducing the triggers, and, addressing their specific, triggers. Both the dogs had very different triggers. They also had very different health concerns. One of them had gut issues, the other had, musculoskeletal issues. But they still saw these escalations. And interestingly, the fights started after Weasley, I think, was attacked by another dog on walk. It was not Potter, it was not one of the dogs, in this conflict that we see, but they were attacked by a dog outside on their walk. And then there was a fight among them when there was a bone involved at home. Again, it was a matter of mismanagement. It was not so much that they didn't know, it was just that not a mismanagement, I would say miscommunication, because one of them had taken one of the dogs for a walk and the other one was with the other human was with the other dog at home, and they came back without communicating about the fact that the bones are lying outside, and the dogs got into fight, and that triggered to escalating of fights to a point. And I think there are pictures, maybe I will share pictures after our call, where there are pictures of wounds on the dogs. That is to the extent where their fights had escalated, and they were getting into fights just by looking at each other. It was not even movement, it was not even anything that the dog would do. The presence of the other dog was triggering each other. So that was the background to the case that I was given. And I found it very difficult initially, because I was like, what more can I help them with? Because they're doing all the basic things that we talk about. We talk about trigger management, we talk about decompression, we talk about enrichment, meeting the needs of the dogs. But I was at a loss of where to start. But this is where this is how the case came to me. These were the videos that were shared with me when we started off. Anything that you all observed, you want to kind of point out at the moment?
Maybe I just want to touch upon the first video, because the interaction looked like how a lot of us would say that they were playing, right? It was play. And this is mostly the kind of play that we see here in Slovenia, right? It's just like frantic, dogs running around, bumping into each other. And it's no wonder that this kind of behavior can then escalate also into a fight, because it's adrenalizing activity. The dogs are like, the stress response is activating, the thinking goes out the window. And Sowjanya, you once shared a really beautiful video of streeties playing on your Instagram, I think. And it looked like a second of play and then pause, a second of play and then pause. And it was, the dogs didn't even come into contact with each other. And it was just like, oh my God, like people have to see what play really looks like. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out, because
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there are a couple of videos of much later with Potter and Weasley where you'll see a lot more communication and regulation in between their interaction. And I was going to point that out, but I'm glad you brought this, because it'll be great for us to keep this in mind when we watch those videos and compare the two, because you'll see how much they are different, you know, when they're so contrasting between the two. So I'm so glad you brought that up. And you're right, we don't see streeties play like this at all. And you see that there was no communication barring barking and growling, right? There was some amount of barking, there was some amount of like those low growls, but there was no other communication. There was just frenzy play.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to mention on the first video. And so many people that we work with. Oh yeah, but off the lead, my dog loves playing with the dogs, but in fact that play is quite boisterous, and because it's a coping mechanism. And it was interesting seeing Potter being the one that wanted to try and seek those exits, get under the table, get under the chair, do a bit of, and then try and find those exits again. You know, and also I think, especially in the other two videos, especially the last one, and actually I think I know they've had their scuffles, but in those videos the communication was quite beautiful, actually, very clear, a lot of posturing. And I think definitely with Weasley in the second video, he was like, okay, I get it. And they did have moments where they were quite intense, quite teethy, and then they just relaxed their mouth a little bit and just thought, okay, we'll just relax a minute, and then kind of we're going to build up again. So I kind of felt they were quite present in that one. And it was interesting with Weasley seeking that social connection with the gentleman sat on the sofa. You know, it's beautiful to watch, isn't it? It really is, to see dogs being very clear. The first video was very different because there wasn't that kind of clarity, because it was all a bit fizzy.
Yeah, I agree completely. And great point on the connection seeking and like seeking, you know, the caregivers, secure space, because we will see that in one other video much later again. So I'm glad you're catching on the smaller things, because that is what actually we worked on, you know, the small things that we were able to see in those small spaces here, and we kind of worked on that. If you see, when in the last video, when that one person human walks away, there's a little bit of de-escalation that happens, which of course again escalates, but that's the other thing that we used for our advantage, where humans walking away actually was helping them de-escalate the situation. Should be anything?
Yeah, I think what would be interesting, Sowjanya, is through the case, if you can also talk about like how did you help the dog parents also find that balance between letting the dogs communicate with each other, but also knowing when to step in, right? Because again, what often happens is when we see dogs growling at each other, sometimes there is an instinctive need to want to step in and diffuse the situation and say, hey, let's stop the growling, let's not do it. But the growling serves a purpose for the two of them together. But also you see in some cases the extreme of it, which is the growling gets encouraged for very long, with the understanding that let the dogs figure it out themselves, when sometimes human intervention is just needed for de-escalation. So I think it'll be great if you can also talk through a little bit of that as we unpack the case study.
Yeah, so I'll just address it right away, because that's what we'll start seeing in the next bits. So very interestingly, in Bharcs, we talk about splitting as one of the body languages for de-escalating, where, you know, humans can act as barriers between the dog and their triggers, right? So-called like threats and monsters, right? Since they had already been introduced the Bharcs way, they had attempted the splitting and it didn't help them, right? So they realized that getting in between or trying to step in between was not helping these dogs, right? And which is where I think individuality of the dogs come in, right? Of course, every suggestion that we give is a great starting point, but then we have to listen to our dogs and listen to their feedback, right? So what might work for my dog may not work for your dog, but start listening to what your dog is saying and go from there. So they tried it didn't work for their dogs, and you see in most of the videos that the humans don't intervene at all, right? Because they started realizing that intervention actually was escalating situation than de-escalating it, right? But when we were having conversations about the case, when I suggested splitting, and then they were like, no, splitting has been escalating the situation. So then I was like, what about if you walk away and call at least one of them away from the situation, right? Whoever is probably responsive. And you will see that that kind of worked for them. Even in this video, you see that one of the human walks away and there's a small de-escalation that happens. And they started doing it very consciously in many of the situations where there was slight tension, and it started helping the dog. So again, I think it's tailoring to what your dog is saying that they need in that moment, right? Splitting didn't work, trying to intervene didn't work. And I think my client has gotten bitten in the process when he tried to intervene in the situation, right? So walking away helped. So it's all about tailoring to your dog and listening to what your dog needs. And walking away worked absolutely perfectly in that case. So we did that, right? So it's all about, I think, listening to the dog in front of you, what they need in the moment. So I think that's how we decided that whether to jump in between or not jump in between. The other thing that I would normally recommend, again, this is a starting point, right? If you feel like the dogs are already so dysregulated, like the one in the first video, I think the dogs are so not in a place to communicate and listen to each other, which would be a great time to get them to, you know, decompress a little bit and come back to like their senses. But I think the second and the third video, there was some amount of communication there where the dogs were still responsive to each other and to the humans around them. And so it's a great time to like look whether you want to de-escalate the situation, whether the dogs are able to de-escalate it. I felt like the second video, they were able to de-escalate it by themselves. Third one, they needed a little bit of intervention. So it's really reading the communication and the body language of the dogs in the moment.
I've got a question in the comments from Kim. Did I hear you, Sowjanya, say that street dogs do not play fight? So the intention of growling for street dogs is always to create space. Can you clarify that for Kim?
No, I said that they don't play in a frenzied manner like how we saw in the first video. They do, there is a lot of communication through growling, you know, barking, a little bit of posturing, but I have not very often seen that escalate into proper physical fight, unless the dogs are, you know, insecure about something, right? It could be their safety, it could be their resources, which are already very scarce, or their, you know, shelter, or they're not very, they're not healthy. So unless that is a situation, we don't see the fights escalate to a point of leaving wounds on each other. But we don't see a frenzied play. And when there is a little bit of frenzied play, it's always interjected by, you know, a lot of like sniffing and calming themselves down. They're great at regulating. So there might be a little bit of chase and then immediately into like sniffing, or, you know, immediately like disengage and go to something else, right? So the extent, I think the first video was a minute or something long. We would never see street dogs play for that long in such frenzied manner. But yes, we do see a lot of like growling as a form of communication, but not as a form of fight.
I think it's some, especially caregivers listening now, you have multi-dogs. How often do we just dive in so quickly And actually listen to you talking and sharing. I think back to when I used to have my friends round, maybe a couple of mates, and it's very much like my mom. She'd know the time when we were getting too much, but the other time she'd let us kind of, do our kind of stuff. And he said stuff, all the kind of things when you start to fall out in those early stages. It's just a comparison. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so if nothing else, shall I move on to the next slide? Okay. Okay, so there was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of growling. The first and the most important thing that is required at that point for us, for the dogs, was separation, because clearly just the presence, the viewing of the other dog, the presence of the other dog, the sight of the other dog was the trigger for each of them. So we decided to separate the dogs. So how did our separation phase look like? Okay, again, lots of growling and barking here. They're barking through the door.
Okay, Mama. It's okay. It's okay. It's all right. It's all right, Mama. It's okay. It's okay, Mama. Good, Mama.
So this was when we were trying to even block the visuals, but we also tried to, over a period of time, keep the doors open. But we had two baby gates separating the dogs, and you will see them.
What is it, Dadu? You want to play with Weezy? Come on, it's okay. Weezy boy. Weezy. Come on. Easy, Mama. It's okay. Come on. Easy. Da. Come here. Da, Nana. Come on. Come on. It's okay. Fly వచ్చినా
Okay, then. So this was when they were separated. I think they were separated for a good 6 to 8 months in this manner, where my client and his wife had to sleep in different rooms, one accompanying each of the dogs, and this took a while. So what you see in the video is after about 3-4 months of being separated, and then there's again a few more months which they start interacting around each other. But again, supervised, right? There was never a time when they were interacting without any supervision. And then we did all the other things that we had spoken about, right? Decompressing, addressing the other triggers. So of course, each of the dogs was a trigger in themselves, but they had other triggers as well. They had health issues, so we were addressing the health issues. Interestingly, my client mentioned this a long time later, that I gave a suggestion during the sessions, and it was so minute for me that I'd forgotten that I had given them this suggestion. But it seemed to help a whole lot for them, because seemingly when Potter would pee in the terrace or in the balcony, it would trigger Weasley, and then they would have fights. The peeing was a trigger, and I had mentioned to them to just cover, like the balcony doors, maybe with a cardboard, maybe with like a curtain, just close it out so that they can't see it visually. And that helped a lot in just, addressing the situation that would trigger both the dogs. And it was so small for me, it didn't register that this was a big advice, and it kind of helped me learn that even small things that we can do, even smallest of changes. I don't think putting like a cardboard box that we have at home, on your balcony door is a big deal for a lot of us, or just closing the curtains, right, during those triggering situation. But that helped the dog so much, because those were few moments of triggers for them. So we were doing all of the other things. The dogs had musculoskeletal issues, so we were doing a lot of functional movement. They had consulted garland myotherapy for massages. They were helping with the gut issues of the dogs. They were doing very slow walks, sniffing walks. They were improving the relationship. So I remember my client telling that his relationship with one of the dogs was good, but with the other dog was not that great. And so each of the dogs had preference of the caregivers. So they would ensure that the one that the dog preferred was the person who would spend time with the dog. But the other person also would, start spending time. The dogs had trigger of humans coming home. So, managing those situations well. I think we were doing all of those things, but their biggest triggers turned out to be the dogs themselves, right? Like the two dogs in the house, and just separating them. And if you observe the videos, I'll ask you guys also whether you saw this, but every time the dogs were walking away, they were being able to de-escalate the situation. They were not as fixated as they would be. So it was a matter of helping them learn that you can walk away and build that new pathway in their brains to be like, oh, I can walk away from the situation. I don't need to keep growling and stay, stand my ground. So I think it was a matter of them learning that. And we know that having new neural pathways, so, learning them, making them more stronger will take time. And that is what we allowed the time for, for them to learn something new and different.
I think your clients were so great, because I was thinking like they have these two dogs in their home that it's supposed to be like a place that you come to relax, decompress. And then you have like two dogs like fighting. They would fight to death if they would not intervene. And they were so like brave to trust the process, to like separate the dogs, to take like 8 months of sleeping in separate bedrooms, basically living separate lives in the same house. And I think it's just so wonderful that they did that. And I was also thinking how important it is for the caregivers to have that support system in those difficult situations, because it's not easy. It's really not easy. And when you're in that situation, it's sometimes hard to believe that situation will improve, to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm so happy that they took this journey with you, and that now things are different. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why Even today, a client messaged about something that, you know, she figured with her dog. And I think a lot of the work is by our clients, right? We just are guiding them through the process. We are giving them a new perspective. We are giving them new ways, some new tools that they can use, tools and techniques. But at the end of it, they are the ones living that life with their dogs, doing this day in and day out. And it's not easy. It's absolutely not easy. To be living separately, you know, they were, I think, recently married at that time, you know, and they had to live in separate rooms for an extended period of time. They didn't know when they could, like, start living together. It's almost like living separately while still being in the same house, right? And it's a lot of stress. But I think, and I guess you guys will agree with me, that if you are uh, tuned into the process, into the philosophy of the Bharcs way, into what you're trying to do and what's your process of achieving what you're trying to do, I think you're committed, right? It is not easy, but I think you're committed. And I think every time a client messages saying, you know, my dog did this, we achieved this, I'm always like, pat your back, because you did this and you have done this, you have sat through this entire journey, and it's not been easy for you. It's not been an easy journey, but you have done it. And, you know, as much as your dog has gone through this journey, you have too. And they always say, thank you, Sowjanya. And I'm like, you know, I've helped you, but I think you have done the big chunk of work here. And it's definitely not an easy journey. And I think that is one of the reasons people shy away from the Bharcs way, right? Because it seems longer. It seems like, you know, you have to put in so much of work. But I think, just like a lot of us have to put a lot of work in our own emotional journeys, in our own, you know, healing journey, I think we have to put in that work for our dogs, as difficult as that might be. Anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think when we think about what we're trying to, what you're helping them to achieve here is a sense of social safety with both dogs. And I always remember the wonderful Rachel Leather, who Rachel was a human trauma expert before she came over to animals, but Rachel says all the time, you can't teach safety because the individual has to feel it. And I think some of the more common ways of dealing with these kind of situations, you're creating a quite a wobbly foundation under stuff. This way, the dogs are feeling it. Like I said, they're feeling the exits. They're feeling that it's still okay. If I need to have a grumble, show my teeth, that's okay. So I think it's a wonderful process, and ultimately we're looking at the chances of these two individual, beautiful animals being able to live in some peace and harmony together. And that isn't something that you can just flick a switch on, is it? So I think it's
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
like Trisha says here, you guided them in their expectation. I think that's really important because, you know, we used to talk about control and management all the time. And I think we need to talk in terms of management and adaptation now. And that adaptation is actually about expectation more than anything in the physical environment.
Yeah, I always get asked how long this is going to take, or are they going to get better? You know, is this going to get different? And I think a big part of what we do is also expectation setting, right? Like, where are we trying to go? Are we, in this case, I think I was very clear that our expectation initially should be that they should be safe around each other. There should not be physical harm to each other initially, which is why the separation happened, right? Because the more they are physically harming each other, they are obviously triggering each other. Then comes the emotional safety around each other. And if they get to a space of cordial living, harmonious living, I think that's a good space. We don't need them to be friends, right? And I think you'll see that a little bit later. But expectation setting becomes such a key part in all of these cases, because we are told that dogs need to be friends. They are like social animals, and, you know, they need to have like friendly interactions, or they should have only positive emotions, whatever positive emotions mean. But I think setting the expectations right becomes such a key to any of these cases, I guess. Okay, Surbhi, were you saying something?
Yeah, I think we're following a pattern now. I was gonna say I actually really appreciated how, and I think in the videos we get to hear only the male human more, but I really appreciated how he just actively like reassured the dogs at different points in time. I think the first video where the dogs are growling at each other with the door as well, seemed like a really, really tense moment where he tried to reassure again using the hand signal. And I love how the presence of that reassurance also enabled the dog then to lean into that connection, because you see that part where the dog starts rubbing the side of their face against the hand. Um, and I was also wondering just like how there's so much conversation about, should we reassure dogs? Should we not reassure dogs? Does that reinforce fear? Does that reinforce, some of those negative associations? Yeah, is that something that you'd like to sort of talk about as well?
Yeah, I think I remember this video very clearly because we had had a discussion about it. And I remember him sending that video as the situation was happening. And he was like, just now this happened. We had spoken about splitting or like hand signal through the door. And I mean, he was quite safe in the situation, but obviously I would caution people to, in the situation, because a dog might like escalate and then bite back, in that frenzy. But at the end of the video, you see that the dog kind of, actually appreciates that reassurance, appreciates that support that the caregiver is able to give. And as the situations progress, you'll see that the dogs start actually seeking the caregiver before trying to escalate any situation, which is what we want the dogs to be able to do, right? Instead of taking matters into their own hands and escalating a situation where there's conflict, they can reach out to their safe, caregiver figures, their safe spaces, to be able to do that for them. And we have seen, I think there's a lot of research where dogs do, reach out to the humans, reach out to just humans around them to be able to solve difficult situations. Why not provide it for them? And I think reassurance, it's very sad that reassurance is seen in such a negative manner, where we only talk about it in the manner of reinforcing something. But I would love that someone's there for me when I'm going through something difficult. And it would be a lot more harder if I have to face that situation by myself and nobody's even acknowledging my difficulty. I think reassurance is just that. It is, I think we need to get out of the mindset of reinforcement and punishment. And I think Andrew has a great series on Beyond the Operant around this. But we really need to get out of that mindset where we see everything as a reinforcement or a punishment, and really look at what communication means, what love means, what safe spaces means, what connection means, right? I think these conversations are a lot more important, because what you see here is the two of them connecting and two of them seeking, Potter seeking his caregivers presence to feel safe. And I would love that. I would love that for myself. If I was in a difficult situation and I found some kind of support, they may not be able to solve my problem, but I know that I'm not alone in this journey, right? And I think that is what reassurance means to me, because I've had the pleasure of experiencing reassurance, and I know what a great impact it can leave on you and your journey, right? In attending to your own emotional experiences, reassurance plays such a huge part. Okay, so shall we move on to the next phase? Okay, great. Okay, so we did the fighting phase, we did the separation phase, we then move on to reintroduction phase. So this is when the dogs started meeting each other again, of course, under supervision, but there was no barriers between.
Vijama. Vijay, come here, mama.
And another one.
తెస్తారు కదా ఏమి తేలేదు స్టేజ్ ఎంత డార్క్గా ఉందో
What happened? కొంచెం వెనక్కి జరిగి కూర్చోవద్దు, you're sitting too close.
Okay, then I found this beautiful because they were reintroduced after quite some time. And I think there is this perception that if you separate the dogs or you avoid triggers for an extended period of time, you're not teaching the dogs how to react to triggers or respond to triggers. And they set a great example of how they have learned a very different way of interacting with each other in a very, I think both the situations were slightly tense. They were not as tensed as the initial situations, but I felt like they were able to communicate so beautifully and they had learned a very different way of dealing with these situations. I don't know if you were all able to kind of see that.
Should I go first? Because we have now me, then Andrew, then Surbi. Yeah, it was really wonderful to see the dogs truly communicating. Yes, there was growling, but there was like yawning, like bowing, turning away. And also did in the second video, did the male caregivers said that they were too close? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This is, I think, so important that the caregivers have the knowledge to see the communication, see what can potentially be a trigger, and then like adapt the situation in that time. But they didn't do like they didn't get up, separate the dogs. I think the camera didn't show, but did the woman like invite
She just
the
scooted a
other
little
dog?
bit.
Yeah. So like it was a very small thing that de-escalated the situation that could come into a fight if maybe they would interfere in a more like visible way, right? So I think, yeah, that was beautiful to watch how they all did such a great job, really. So
yeah, I think there was a lot more calming signals and body language cues in these videos as compared to the first three videos. And the first three videos, there was a lot of like growling, barking, and posturing, and then seeking caregivers, connection. But here you see so many, as you rightly pointed, Eva, you see so many of those small signs. And I love how the caregiver was so tuned into it. And he was like, you're sitting a little too close. And she scooted a little bit and there was enough distance. And the dogs was like, okay, I'm relaxed now. Right. And I think that's what mindful parenting is all about, right? You're just mindful of these small things and you're able to read your dog so well that you just get clued into the smallest of like tensed up muscles, changes in their, reactions or like their movements, their behaviors. You're so clued into it that you're able to immediately adapt, as you rightly said. And the adaptation need not be big things, right? At this point, you saw that they didn't need to separate them, past the doors or the baby gates. It was just scooting a little bit and that worked.
Yeah, there's a lot more subtlety, wasn't there, in this one? I think in the early videos, there was that posturing, there was that kind of brinkmanship that we're up here, and they kind of knew they were both up here, and that was fine. But this one is like, oh, go up a bit, you come down a bit. It was just really lovely. And I think the one thing I really want, especially, well, everybody really, but especially caregivers, to really take from this is how beautifully the caregivers were allowing that to play out, and like I say, know when to kind of do those little subtle things. And I often refer to behavior a bit like painting a picture and allowing the dog to paint their picture without grabbing the brush all the time. And I think that's what does it beautifully. And I love how you've entitled these these different phases as well. I think it's really cool to recognize things. Trisha asks about how early on were these videos. Could you give us a bit of a timeline on the videos where we're kind of at now?
Yeah, I think this was about a year into our work, year and a half into our work. So if I were to put an exact timeline, I have it. I actually had like the month and the year written for each of the thing. So the first few videos is around 2021, early 2021. That's when also we started our work together. So the growling and the barking you see past the door where Potter is, behind a door and he's barking, that was August 2021. I remember very well. And the videos that you see now are all in 2022. The videos that you're seeing now, the reintroduction phase was in 2022. Yeah. Yeah, I think this was March 2020. June, March 2022.
And I think it's worth just pointing out that it's not like not doing anything. I think because there's two sides to that. One is there are other things that you are looking at as well with these dogs that would be being looked at. And also, actually, I see some of the stuff that gets misrepresented. Some of the things I talk about, which is, oh, he's the guy who says, get on with it. And it's funny how people think of it that way. But actually doing less, interjecting less, is kind of doing more sometimes. I think this is the key. And it's a bit of a skill in itself, because you want to kind of get in. We're so used to micromanaging.
Yeah. And I think that is so hard for us to not do something, because I think this is where conversations around intersectionality comes in, because in capitalistic world, we are told that we are our best when we are most productive, and we are most productive when we are constantly doing something. And which is why it takes a lot for us to actually step back and say, I don't need to do much here. All I need to do is very small things, but they have big impact, right? And as you rightly said, we were doing a lot of other things, but when you look on the outside, it doesn't look like we are doing a lot, right? It doesn't look like we are doing big things, while trying to manage slight diet related concerns. Carpeting the house is not much to do, right? You see carpets all around the house, if you see, because ensuring that they're not hurting the muscles and joints. So there are all these small things that we're doing, but it has quite a big impact. And a lot of times you're not doing much. Actually, you are not doing anything at all for a large part of the work. And it almost seems like, which is why I think we all have conversations saying, what do we put up on social media, because we're not doing anything. It doesn't look like we're doing big things, or it's not dramatic enough. But there's so much that's actually happening in the background, which cannot be put in on social media and get attention in that manner. But we do have all of these conversations.
I just throw you another couple of questions from the chat before Saravi comes in. Liz says, I'll tell you both the questions. Did the caregivers each spend all their time with one dog and not the other, or did they share their time when they were separated? And also, can this happen in any multi-dog household, or does the fact that they are streeties play a factor?
I have had quite a few multi-dog household where this has happened. It's not just a streety thing. It is just when two dogs get into a situation where they feel unsafe being around each other, and it can escalate to this. But I feel like streeties get this name because they're so good at communicating, and they're so, strong with the boundaries. Not trained to behave in a certain manner, which means that they're so strong with the boundaries, they're so good at communicating. But I've seen this happen with a lot of other dogs as well. And I've had cases where dog caregivers take preemptive measures so as to not let situations escalate to this manner. I've had clients who have had, bring in a second dog, and then they manage the situations from the very beginning And they're so clued in from the very beginning so that the situations don't escalate to this manner. But this can happen to anybody for sure. And the other question was, I forget. What was the other question?
About whether the caregivers split their time up between
Yeah,
the dogs.
they did split their time, but I think the sleeping and all the other, very vulnerable situations were spent with the caregiver that the dogs were more comfortable with, though they were comfortable with both caregivers, but they had preference that, I like this human more, or I prefer this human more. And they did interact with both dogs, but I think there was one particular caregiver who did spend more time than the other with each of the dogs. So that happened as well. In fact, actually, I remember mentioning it to my client to also spend time with each other, the other dogs as well, because to improve the relationship with the other dog as well, right? Where the dogs can rely on this human too, while their primary caregiver is not present. So I think that was also a conversation we have had before. I hope that answers both the questions. Surbi, you had anything to add in?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to do two observations really quickly. I think one was just in terms of expectations. I think, just building off of what we were sharing previously, I think even in the reintroduction stage, I think walk in with an expectation of not walking in with the expectation that they're now suddenly going to become best friends, right? But just saying, can we look for different ways that they're able to communicate with each other? Can we look for lesser escalated situations? Because again, I think to what you shared, a lot of the times when we talk about taking those necessary breaks for dogs to decompress, and then when we reintroduce them in certain environments, we expect them to have like this overnight magical, reaction to it, which doesn't really happen, right? So I think just adjusting that expectation. I think the other expectation is just in terms of timeline, because I think what Andrew spoke about previously was we're helping dogs feel safe, and that cannot come with a specific timeline. It takes the time that it takes, right? And for some dogs, that can happen let's say within 3 months or 6 months. For some dogs, it just takes longer. And I think that's also part of the Bharcs way to say we have to work at the dog's pace and let the dog guide us to tell us when they are ready. I think that's one piece I wanted to add. And the second piece that I wanted to add is I did want to comment on how regulated the caregiver sounded in that interaction. Because I know that if I were in that interaction, and I have been in similar interactions, I would be nervous wreck, right? And it would show up in my body language, it would show up in my tone, it would show up, and I know how that can also add to escalating the situation. So I also feel like there is a component of how do you regulate yourself as a caregiver in some of these situations, and how do you also set expectations and timelines for yourself, right? To say, listen, I can do this when I feel ready, and I don't want to do this when I don't feel ready. So those were the only two things I wanted to share very quickly.
Yeah. Your first point is great because that kind of ties into our next phase, which is the last phase of the videos that I have. And second point is such a great observation, because I think it's also important that the caregivers are regulated, right? And there are times when they're not regulated. Obviously, it happens to everybody, and it's okay to kind of take a step back if you need to, if you want to take a break, if you need to, if you feel like you're not ready for that situation to play out. And I think the fact that they managed to reintroduce the dog at that moment, it would be great to do when you feel more ready and when you feel more regulated, than put pressure on yourself and on the dogs to do it sooner than either of you are ready for it. Great point, Sylvie. Thank you. Okay, so the last phase, I have named it something, but you'll see something else altogether. Okay, so the last phase is the comfort phase. And okay. This, if I remember, was November 2022, this video.
Oh, done. It's okay now. It's okay.
Okay. I purposely named it comfort phase, and I remember Eva mentioning. So had shared the presentation with all of them, and Eva had pointed that you've stormed at comfort, but then there's a little bit of growling in the videos also. I'm guessing you're going to talk about it, and as you rightly said, I'm going to talk about it because as we have spoken about expectation setting, the whole case was not about getting the dogs to be friendly. It was about conflict management, if at all they were in conflict spaces. So it was not about the fact that they would never have conflict. How many of us are living without conflict with people we share our homes with? I think we all get into conflicts with people we share our homes with, but it's about learning how to manage those conflicts. And I think they both, while the first video in the last slide was all about friendliness, and there was a lot of physical contact there were other videos where they were communicating great in a great manner, not just with each other but with the humans as well, and the human was finding ways to make it comfortable for the dog. You see that Potter goes and reaches out to caregiver a few times, and finally the male caregiver moves couple of pillows. Again, what a small change in the environment, and it made Potter feel so much more safe, and he kept petting Weasley through that interaction, which was also maintaining connection, right, with Weasley, while reassuring Potter constantly. And then up, two cushions, sliding away, and then Potter felt comfortable. Such small things that you can do to make your dog comfortable, but also the fact that they learned a very different way of managing conflict situations. Potter walked away, came back, found other things to help him, regulate him, and then reached out to caregiver, communicated so much And I felt like this case was not so much about making dogs, friendly again, but much more to do with conflict management, because I feel like we fear conflict so much and we run away from conflict so much that we put that undue pressure on our dogs to be like, don't get into conflicts. Conflicts are not great, but it is such an unfair expectation because it's not like we don't have conflicts at all. So it's more about managing conflict. And I think they represented this so well through the entire case. The documentation of this case was great by the caregiver. They documented every single phase of the journey of the dogs. And I think they represent this journey so well.
I love the second and the third video when Potter was like, "Mom, Mom, I would like to go on the bed, do something." And then, yeah, as you said, like the pillows, like simple pillows, like gave him the reassurance that he needed to go onto the bed. And how many times is like he asked his female caregiver for that reassurance in a very subtle way, right? He just walked to her, and how many times we miss that because they are very subtle in their communication, but then if we don't listen to them long enough, they will start barking, they will start jumping on us. And this is where it again comes in how important it is to understand their communication, especially the subtle signs, because once you start to observe those, the dog doesn't have to escalate to ask you for that reassurance that they need. So yeah, I think all of the videos were very beautiful, and what a beautiful journey, really. Thank you, Sowjanya, for sharing this with us.
Yeah, and big shout out to the caregivers
Yeah.
for like documenting the entire journey. It gives us the insight into what goes on in the background.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think what they both learned really, but especially Potter, I think, because you really see the changes in Potter during those videos. And I think Potter's really learnt to seek safety over conflict. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And we've got to move beyond this notion that, traditionally we've almost put a line, this is okay behavior, but that isn't. And we've got to move on from that. I think all behavior is valid. Obviously, if it creates harm to another, that's a thing that we have to mitigate for, which is important, of course. But grumbling and growling, that's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's like, I'm sure. I love how you put that in, because the first one was really lovely, a little bit of grooming, that's fine. You almost got the sense that was a bit of testing of the waters there. How's that for you? Is that okay? But then the second video to show that these things are never a linear process, and we've got to support our clients when they're working to recognize that the dogs are allowed to have a moment, which is different to a meltdown, but they're allowed to have a moment, especially when I think about a lot of clients who have dogs who might bark and lunge at other dogs in pub, thing. This notion that somehow you're going to go through your process and the dog won't do stuff. They need to recognize, okay, dog had a woof. That's because they needed to right now, and they're trying to tell you something. This is really beautiful, Sowjanya. This has been such an amazing session for me. And the caregivers, I just want to give them a hug, really. And it's a beautiful process. And these dogs are allowed to communicate, feel they can communicate. The whole thing about emotional safety is the feeling that your feelings are valid, but also that you feel safe to communicate how you feel, however that might look sometimes. So just stunning presentation. It's amazing. I've got some questions in the group, but I'll come back to those in a minute, and we'll flip over to Sarabi.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to really comment on is, at least for me, as I'm watching these videos and now seen these videos a couple of times, I think there's a certain lightness that I also travel with each of the phases. And so I feel like in the end, towards the last video, I think the growling for me, the way that I inferred it really, and given the context, is almost like, hey, don't mess with me. I'm just warning you, don't mess with me, right? It's very different from what the intensity of the growling and the tension of the growling feels like at the beginning of it, right? And I think exactly what Andrew said, I think those are moments that our dogs are 100% allowed to have, right? To be able to communicate to one another saying, hey, boundary, let's break away from it. And I think what was really interesting, it's Potter, right? The white dog, yeah. The number of calming signals right after that. It's so many calming signals again to like de-escalate for him, de-escalate for Weasley. And so I think there's also that lightness that you start reading into because you start reading your dogs, which I think comes through. Which again I think helps navigate the whole situation really well, even for caregivers. I think that was an observation.
Yeah, I think you don't see that much of tension in the dogs, like this entire, like this high intensity tension that you see in the initial videos, which is great. And the other reason why I love this case is because we are often told our ways don't work with difficult dogs, right? We are told that, you can work with milder cases if there's anything called milder cases, but work with a difficult dog and then you'll see that your ways don't work. This is a constant criticism that we have heard of Bharcs' way, and I feel like this puts all of that criticism to rest, because we have seen the dogs bite each other to a point of wounds. We have seen the dogs by mistake attacking the caregivers because the caregivers try to intervene, to a point where they're comfortable to communicate their discomfort with each other, but also with the caregivers without escalating. And as both Andrew and Surabhi mentioned, I feel like our dogs are allowed to have those moments, and they must be able to feel safe to express those moments around their caregivers. Unfortunately, by using certain methods, we try to suppress these behaviors where the dogs don't feel safe anymore to communicate these behaviors. And I feel like that's so much more harmful for the dogs, for all those around them, because it's just, there is something underlying and it's just waiting for like things to escalate, and you don't see signs of it, and suddenly people come and say, oh, I didn't know, like my dog was fine all this while, and all of a sudden my dog reacted in this manner, because unfortunately they weren't given safe spaces to be able to have those moments, to be able to communicate those moments to those around them, and then actually be heard. And I think Potter and Weasley are a great example. And as usual, a huge shout out to my clients. They did a great job with them. So much of patience, so much of commitment, so much of, trusting not just the process, but the dogs as well, trusting each other, being each other's support system, because I don't think they had other people to help them, right? It was just the two of them leaning on each other while they were handling two dogs who were, having this conflict. So shout out to all of them. Shout out to Bharcs' way.
Just one more thing that came to my mind when you said that the Bharcs' way doesn't work for difficult cases. That is like saying like difficult people don't need love, empathy, safety, understanding. Those are things that we all need. Like how horrible and lonely it would be, like just thinking about not having those things. So that was just like one thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they deserve so much more love and safe spaces, because they're asking for that love, they're seeking that love, they're seeking that safety. And unfortunately, dogs who do display these kind of behaviors end up being subjected to further harsh methods, and again losing what they truly need, which is what all of us need, right? So yeah, I mean, great point, Eva.
And I think there's there's another little thing that kind of goes through the thread here about understanding stress more generally, because I think stress I prefer the word pressure, really, because stress is an everyday part of life, and we have stress, we have a bit more stress, we have less stress, we elevate, we decompress. It's the amount of pressure we feel and how we cope with that pressure. And again, there's a temptation not only to dive in because we want to stop a behavior or change it, but there's also that, oh, they're stressed. We got to somehow make sure they're never feeling that kind of thing. And I think social interactions, I talk a lot about social stress and social pain and that, because it's the one thing that connects us very strongly, because we're a social species, and being sociable is hard at times for all of us, and we feel a lot of social pressure, and it's how we navigate those things and how we feel these things. And I think it comes with allowing them to go through, in human psychology, thoughts, we have what we call stress cycles, how important it is to experience that and come round. A lot of the time that cycle is stopped. And actually, we build resilience over time by feeling it. That was a bit rubbish, but actually I was okay, rather than I feel rubbish and I just go on feeling rubbish. I think, and that's been played out in these videos beautifully, I think, allowing the dogs to deal with those elements of pressure, and the caregivers, like you say, intervening when they felt that pressure was getting too much. It's always a judgment call, and I think it's important. We don't always get it right, and I think even with each other as humans, we don't always get it right. Amazing. Oh wow. Okay, cool. So do you know, I don't know whether the caregivers are listening in or they're going to see this at some point, but I hope you feel the love in this room for you, and what you've done for these and are doing for these wonderful animals, wonderful doggies. Okay, so a few questions then. Trisha just asked about what that first interaction between the two dogs looked like. Where was it? How did they first meet? Do you know much about that? So that was ahead of you, before you worked with them.
Yeah, they both were, picked off of street as puppies. I think they were rescued off of the streets because I think their mother was not around and things like that. Their first interaction was in the house, and it was quite. There are pictures and videos of their interactions from initially too when Potter came in. So I will add those pictures as well in the comments after the video. But it was good for a while, I guess. And then there were small escalations. As I said, Potter's peeing was a big trigger for Weasley. And Potter was younger, so there was not much of bladder control. There were peeing incidents at home, and that would cause escalations. And then there were like these small triggers, these one-off incidents that would happen, which then led to a big escalation later. And as I said, it was not even, I think it was redirected towards each other. The big trigger was actually the attack from another dog during walk. I think Weasley was attacked, and Weasley was completely uncomfortable with dog attacks at that point. And then there was a bone incident as well, which is why I think we do tell dog caregivers who are a multi-dog household, to do a little bit of management in general around food, around basic resources, around just preventional measures, right? Like, keep them separated around food, keep them separated around bones, give them safe spaces, multiple dog beds. I've seen this, have 2 dog beds for 2 dogs, and then just automatically assume that each of the dogs know which is whose bed. And it's so arbitrary, and it is so, I mean, why assume that the dogs know whose bed is what, and are 2 beds enough? In fact, in our consultations, I think all of us say that have so many beds that the dogs can choose from multiple, and they don't feel the scarcity of beds. How many times we have seen conflict around like resting spaces? So I think these small good practices are something that we advocate for multi-dog household, even when there's no conflict, because even one conflict can escalate to a point where you'll have to separate the dogs like this for months together, right? So I think prevention measures are great. And it's good to get our dogs to feel secure in, especially in these vulnerable situations of meals and resting. So yeah, I think they did meet at home first. Potter was adopted later. Weasley was the one who came home first. I guess that answers the question. And I have pictures and videos of their interactions initially. I will add it into the comments.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's great. And I think an interesting point there as well is that I've worked with dogs before where they're like, oh, well, you know, they both go on the bed together because there's only one bed. You know, it's a fine line between sharing space because you want to, or, well, that's the only place I can go to and I'll have to sit next to you. I think so giving those options is really cool. And even the food, I think, you know, we've got 3 dogs. They all eat separately. They could quite easily eat together. But I think, you know, we all want to have those things, those times that are really important for us. We like to have our own time doing that thing and enjoying it. And I think it's really important. Okay, so 2 souls, 1 team. I love that. 2 souls, 1 team. Will the change in the dog's relationship and emotional state be more sustainable when allowing this long period of time for change in the absence of the usual kind of reinforcing of acceptable behaviors as practiced in conventional training?
I have seen that this is more sustainable because we are not teaching the dog how to react. The dog is inherently learning what feels comfortable for them to react. And the last videos you saw is 2 years down the line from the initial interactions in the videos that you saw. So the first videos were around March 2021, and the last videos you saw were March 2023. And you see in the 2-year period, and even till date, I haven't heard the caregivers come back to me and say that my dogs have escalated the situation again, or to a point where we have to separate them, you know, again. Of course, as we all, you know, agreed that dogs are allowed to have these moments, but they have learned something so inherently comfortable for them, which I think that is more important. For me to tell my dog to sit, stay, no, etc., would require repeated reinforcing because it's not something that's coming inherently what my dog wants to do. Instead, in these cases, when you see Potter walk away, come back, you know, reach out to something for regulation, reach out to the caregiver figure, it's something that he has learned helps him in such conflicting situation, which I feel like is far more sustainable because he knows that this is what is helping him, you know, manage the conflict. So I've seen that this is far more sustainable in all the cases that I've worked with, when the dog is figuring out what is working for them and what is helping them navigate the situation, because it's so individualistic. I wouldn't say that the same case that happened with Potter and Weasley can work as a template for another dog, because another dog is very different dog and they will have a very different way of dealing with the same situation, in which case everything changes for them. Of course, the process remains the same, the approach remains the same, but what the dog ends up learning in the process and what they decide is their coping mechanism and the way they address the difficult situation, what they learn and decide how to manage conflict would be so different, like how it is for humans, I guess.
And that's because that's because our version of safety is so individual for us. And I think this is one thing that people need to understand a little bit regarding reinforcement, that difference between what is extrinsically motivated and what is intrinsically valuable. And the 2 things aren't always together. And I use the doors of the brain analogy, thinking about, you know, if you have the doors in the brain and we need as many doors to stay open, to think about things a bit better and to regulate better and to have that sensory integration happen. And as we feel that pressure, some doors start closing. And actually the first doors to start closing are likely to be the ones that have extrinsically motivated stuff behind it, because it's not intrinsically valuable. The doors that are likely to stay open are the survival doors. And I think, and that's why it's much better longer term for that dog to find their foundated safety on their terms. One other quick little point, I think, about self-regulation. We definitely saw that in the last video with Potter. Self-regulation is not the same as not feeling. And I think, and even, you know, I see some things in some of the parent groups for humans where they're being supported in learning about co-regulating with their children. And they're like, my God, I'm so tired and I'm stressed and I'm all these kind of things. How am I supposed to be calm? It's not about being anything. It's about whatever you're feeling, you're able to still regulate and be able to kind of be present. And I think that's the key about self-regulation. So it's definitely not about not feeling. So in that second video, he was still feeling, right? He was feeling and he needed to have a grumble, but he was able to regulate through that. That's the beautiful thing, rather than dysregulate as a result of it and kind of lose it. Would you say there is still a level of stress? Yeah, I think we covered this a little bit anyway, but I'll say anyway, Zoe. Would you say there is still a level of stress? And is this from the dog's well-being point of view, or would you even raise an option, if available, of rehoming to allow the dog's individual space?
I mean, I have given an option of rehoming only in one case in my entire consulting period, when I knew that the dogs were not, their needs were not being met, their well-being was not taken care of, and the humans were also not having a great quality of life. That was the only time I have actually suggested rehoming. Every other time I've seen that um, the caregivers and the dogs both are present and are able to work through. Also, the expectation of no stress or no issues and no conflict is, as we spoke about already, it's a utopian concept. How many of us don't have any stress at all? How many of us don't have any conflicts at all? I tend to have conflict with my husband, I think, every week on something or the other, right? Because we are two different human beings, two different individuals living under same household, having very different stressors, having very different triggers, having very different state of being at different points. And so conflicts do happen. It's about how you're navigating that conflict, is how big that conflict is. Are you able to deal with it? Are you needing another support system to help you deal with it? Would I say that my husband and I should like separate now because we're having conflicts every week? I wouldn't. So if that is something that applies to me and my husband, why not to the dogs and their caregivers? Because there is going to be some amount of stress, there is going to be some amount of conflict, there is going to be some amount of challenges in all our lives. It's just about, are they able to manage it, are they able to deal with it, are they able to address it? Because not having any conflict, not having any issues, uh, not having even like a little bit of tense moments is a utopian concept for me.
I love that. And I think it's also when you think about the caregivers in this particular case, and how aware they are of their dogs and who they are and what they need. You could make an argument, well, maybe the dogs might be better off on their own for sure, but what would that other life look like then? And what would that other caregiver for the dog that went away be that? Or would they be living a life of sufferance? Do they just happen to be on their own? We always have to juggle these things. And I know when Molly came crashing in, she came very much crashing into our lives, and poor old Harley, Rother Lab, who's living his best life, and then this kind of really rambunctious puppy comes in and is all over the place. I kind of had to say to him, look, it's being a part of the Hale family. We have these dogs come, and sometimes they stay and sometimes they go because if we foster. But 95% of your life is going to be pretty perfect for you. We have to make adaptations. I aspire to only having conflict with my husband once a week, by the way. That's great. I hope he's listening in. Great, good. Well, I think that's it. I think I've covered most of the stuff in the chat there. What an amazing presentation, and it's just really value you and your work, Sowjanya, and these wonderful caregivers, and sharing these stories with us.
Thank you so much, Andy.
So good. Well, the next time is Sarabi. We lost you for a moment, Sarabi. I know you've got some in and out powery stuff going on. I don't know whether you can hear us or whether you can speak to us, but you're on next Sunday. So next Sunday, that's the 9th. In the group, it'll be Sarabi doing her presentation, and looking forward to that. Before then, we have Matthew Beisner coming in the group on Thursday. That'll be another quite powerful, vulnerable chat, because Matthew's got a lot to share with us. But really looking forward to Sarabi next Sunday. Thank you, Sowjanya. Thank you to everybody who's kind of stuck with us today and been so engaging in the group. Anybody who's looking at this on kind of follow-up, obviously now we're on Facebook, you can just keep adding comments in and we'll just keep checking in. Anything you want to close on, Sowjanya?
No, I think we covered everything. And I think the whole point of this case, I think I'm repeating it, but it was about showing that there are no difficult dogs. Yeah. They're only dogs who are going through difficult situations, and there's nothing like our ways do not work for, or soft ways or kind ways do not work for difficult dogs. And that this is not about not having any conflict. Again, it's about conflict management. And I think Potter and Weasley really model it for us very well. I think humans can learn it from that as well.
Well, amen to that. I think that's a good, really good, powerful point to finish on. Well, thank you again. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Sarabi, as well, for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody in the group. And wherever you are and whatever time of day it is, please look after yourself and your loved ones, because that's what we do as a social species. Great. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.